Hi friends, Father Carey here, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one asking, is it your faith that you're losing, or is it something else? Every month I receive dozens of letters from viewers of Holy Spirit moments asking me for advice. They tell me that they worry about losing their faith, that their faith doesn't seem as strong as it once was, and they're quite distressed by this. My general bit of advice that I offer them is this: to ask themselves if it's their faith that they fear losing, or are they losing beliefs? I know that may sound weird because we generally think of the two words, belief on the one hand and faith on the other, as synonymous. I admit that they are interlinked with one another, but they're not at all synonymous. And I can illustrate this with a very simple example. I can say, I believe that you have 10 fingers. Or I can say, I have faith that you have 10 fingers. And as you can immediately see, there's a crucial difference between these two sentences. They both may be meaningful, but they don't both suggest the same thing, do they? A belief is an assent to or an affirmation of a statement or proposition or sentence. Faith is a disposition to trust or to rely upon. We can see that from the Latin root of our word faith. It's a verb, fidere, which means to trust. Belief is an assent to a proposition. Faith is a trust or reliance upon. Now, in the religious context, when we believe, what we're doing is assenting to dogmas or doctrine or theological arguments. A doctrine, of course, is simply a teaching of the church. A dogma is a teaching that has been revealed. When we exercise faith, however, we are exercising a fundamental disposition, a deep-seated tendency on our part that's prior to our assent to any belief. And that intuition, that trust, is that we dwell in a universe which is beneficent, which has been created by something beyond us. We call it God. And that God is itself beneficent because of the nature of the universe in which we dwell. This is a fundamental rock bottom intuition. It is a reliance upon and trust in the goodness of reality and the goodness of the creator of the reality. It comes prior to any belief that we might have in the religious sphere. And as a matter of fact, the beliefs, the doctrines, the dogmas, and the theological arguments are attempts to flesh out this primordial, deep, prior intuition. Now, in the religious sphere, there are three possibilities. One can have belief without faith. Alas, I suspect that that's the situation in which many Christians find themselves. And what I mean by that is that we can give a kind of notional or head assent to dogma and doctrine without really having any reliance or trust in them. We sort of mouth the words out of habit, out of inertia. And if we have that kind of position, we're not likely to feel any distress. We're not likely to feel any conflict between the absence of faith, but the affirmation of beliefs. Or we can have a position in which there is no belief and no faith. That's the position of an atheist, the person who neither believes in any of the doctrines or dogmas of the church, nor has any intuition that there's something greater than himself or herself, which can be called even loosely God. And there's no distress in that particular position either. The position that many people who write me find themselves in, however, I think, is one with faith, but with a waning confidence in religious beliefs. And that causes a great deal of distress. That's what people mean when they say, I worry that I'm losing my faith. I want to say something to you that is important. First, everyone has doubts about religious belief. I don't care if you're a layperson or if you're a priest. Unbelief is always a shadow of belief. Sometimes we find ourselves fervent in our religious beliefs. At other times we find ourselves kind of lukewarm and tepid. And it's still other times we find ourselves outright disbelieving what we once thought was plausible. And usually that disbelief comes and it goes, but it ought not to be confused with the underlying faith that we have in the fact that there is something in the universe which is beneficent. That's the first point to keep in mind. And here's the second point, and it is equally important. That distress that you are feeling, if you believe that you are losing your faith, it is longing. Don't mistake it for guilt. Don't mistake it for shame. It is the heart's longing to connect with that which our deep-seated faith believes to be the case. St. Paul, in the letter to the Romans, chapter 8, verses 26 and 27, tells us that a sigh of longing for God is, in fact, a prayer. Whenever we sigh with longing, which we sometimes call distress, what we are doing is reaching out or perhaps reaching in to touch base with that deep-seated intuition, with that faith, with that trust, with that reliance that there is something greater than ourselves, even if we no longer, for one reason or another, find all of the religious beliefs that are associated with that faith plausible. Sometimes we find them implausible because we've just grown weary of trying to understand them. Sometimes we find them implausible because perhaps we're hanging on to rather immature versions of them. We're hanging on to a Sunday school kind of understanding of God, which as adults no longer can satisfy us. But for whatever reason, even if the beliefs begin to go out the window for one reason or another, temporarily in most cases, the faith remains. And that is why we're able to feel what we consider to be distress, but which is really longing when we undergo what we consider to be a loosening of faith. So my friends, if you believe that you are losing faith, what might be happening is that you're simply losing belief. And what's to be done about that? Well, I would suggest that there are 3 strategies that can help you. Hang on. Of course, grace is going to be present in each one of these strategies. The first strategy is exercise patience. Be patient with yourself, just as patient as God is with you. Recognize that in the spiritual life, there are different seasons. Sometimes, once again, we are fervent, and at other times we are not. Sometimes we are in dry, arid deserts, and sometimes we are in lush meadows. Be patient. Recognize that as long as the underlying faith remains, the beliefs may return. They may return in a more mature way. They may return in a different kind of way, but they will return. Be patient. My second bit of advice is persevere. If you belong to a liturgical Christian tradition, it is so important, I want to suggest to you, my friends, that you persevere in the sacraments. And of course, the sacrament of sacraments is the Eucharist. You may no longer believe in the efficacy of the Eucharist, but I want to suggest to you that your faith that there is something greater than yourself will lead you to the Eucharist, and that you will absorb its goodness. You will absorb its wellness. You will absorb the life-givingness that it has to offer. Persevere in that. And finally, I would suggest to you that practice is important. Be mindful of what you do as a person who has faith that there is something greater than yourself. Do good works. Try to be as beneficent as you recognize the universe being. And continue in prayer, even if your prayer is nothing more than that sigh of longing which St. Paul talks about. Practice, perseverance, and patience, I believe, are the ways in which we can allow the faith that we retain to slowly, gradually bring back the beliefs that we may right now find implausible. And when they bring those beliefs back, once again, they may strike you as different than they once did. Patience and perseverance and practice may in fact open up those beliefs which you once found incomprehensible or implausible. You may sense the deep mystery in them. You may not be able to express the mystery, that after all is why it is a mystery, but you can now experience it and feel it and recognize that even though you will never be able to understand it, it has something to offer you. My friends, the distress that you may be feeling if you worry that you are losing your faith could be a holy longing to reconnect, to dive deeper, to experience God more fully. Don't misinterpret it as guilt, but interpret it as an opportunity to dive ever more deeply into God. I'm Father Carey. I hope this has been helpful. This has been another Holy Spirit moment. God bless you. I will see you next time. If you are mine to subscribe, I invite you to do so. Until next time, take care.